Ah,
Good morning.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Good
I
morning,
can
sir.
hear some vessels banging in the background.
Good morning, sir.
I can hear some vessels banging in the background. Some people are still having their breakfast or lunch is being. Hmm. So what is that banging sounds in the background? Somebody is banging the vessels and telling, "Go Corona, go." Huh? Hmm? Emma? Hmm. So in the last class, we completed our discussion on the heterometric regulation of cardiac output. And we saw that for the heterometric regulation of cardiac output, ultimately, it is the end diastolic volume which is important. And more important than end diastolic volume is what determines the end diastolic volume. What determines the end diastolic volume?
Venus return.
Venous. So what are the factors which influence the venous return?
Thoracic cardiac pump.
So we have three pumps here, is it not? So we have the cardiac pump. In the cardiac pump, again we have two things. One is a force from behind, other is a force from front. What is the force from behind and what is the force from front?
We say cargo and
We say turbo and we say fronto. In we say turbo, you have the pumping action of the heart and one more effect. What is that effect called
Wind
as?
Kessel.
Which vessels are called as Wind Kessel effect? Vanilla 160, 169 will tell. Roll number 169. Roll number 169 will tell. Which vessels are called as Wind Kessel vessels?
Aorta,
Aorta?
pulmonary artery.
No. It is
Lung.
mainly the aorta. Okay. The aorta and large arteries are called as Wind Kessel vessels, not the pulmonary artery. So these vessels are elastic in nature. They have more elastic fibers in them. So what happens during systole, when blood is pumped into them, they are going to dilate, and during diastole, they are going to recoil and see that the blood is pumped forward. So they are named as Wind Kessel effects because in Germany you have a similar reservoir, an elastic reservoir, where water is filling into that reservoir and it will stretch and it will recoil elastically, and that will pump the blood to all the houses or wherever the water has to be delivered. Okay, and I also told you the difference between atherosclerosis and arteriosclerosis. And arteriosclerosis is going to cause an increase in the aortic pressure, and that is going to cause a widening of the pulse pressure. Pulse pressure being the difference between systolic and diastolic blood pressure. Okay, so if you look at the visse fronto is the force from front. You have the systolic suction pressure and diastolic suction pressures. Then we also saw the muscle pump, the thoracic pump, the increase in blood volume. And one tone I introduced. I introduced a word called as tone. Which tone?
Motor tone.
So even in the resting condition, continuously sympathetic fibers are being sent to the venous system, especially the medium and the large veins. And the vascular smooth muscle in these veins, they are they are under a state of contraction always. Okay. So if the sympathetic discharge is going to increase, the veins will constrict, and whatever blood is there inside the vein will be pushed towards the right atrium, thereby increasing venous return and diastolic volume, force of contraction, and stroke. That is like a song. So venous return increases and diastolic volume increases, increased stretching of the myocardium, increased force of contraction, stroke volume increase. That you have to tell it in sequence without missing any step. Ad nauseum, I have told you this repeatedly. Okay, so blood volume increases, venomotor tone increases, then posture because of the effect of gravity, and then the vascular distensibility, ventricular distensibility or compliance of the ventricles. So you have been using this word compliance again and again and again. So one simple formula for compliance, C is equal to delta V by delta P. Change in volume per unit change in pressure. Or in very simple terms, compliance is the ease with which the structure can be stretched or distended. Okay, so ventricles also are hollow chambers. The walls of the ventricles are also elastic, not as elastic as the aorta, but some amount of elasticity is there in the ventricles. Okay, so the ability to stretch the ventricles or ability of the ventricles to stretch is called as compliance. And as age advances, everything is going to become stiff. So the ventricular wall becomes stiff. And if there are some disease processes like myocardial infarction, where there is loss of myocardium, that can cause a further loss of distensibility. There are some infiltrative disorders, amyloidosis or fat infiltrative disorders. Again, the ventricular wall loses its elasticity. And in all those conditions, the compliance, stretchability, and the stroke volume is going, force of contraction and stroke volume is going to be affected. we'll move on to the homometric regulation of cardiac output. I'll come back to this diagram afterwards. I did introduce this to you. I'll come back to this afterwards. Okay. So we can draw a graph with the end diastolic volume, ventricular end diastolic volume on the x-axis. What are the other names you can give for the ventricular end diastolic volume?
Initial length of
Preload.
Preload. Okay. Or you can also call it as initial length of the cardiac muscle fiber also, because ultimately this is the one which is going to determine the initial length of the cardiac muscle fiber. On the y-axis, you have the stroke volume. Any other words you can use for the stroke volume here?
Force of contraction.
Yeah, you can call it as the
Force of
yes, very good. Yeah, you can also call it as the force of contraction. Okay. So now you can draw a graph in different situations. We call this as myocardial contractility. So if you remember our discussion in the properties of the cardiac muscle fiber, myocardial contractility is also called as dash state.
Inotropic.
Very good. It is called as inotropic state. Inotropic state. Myocardial contractility is also called as inotropic state. Okay. So can anybody tell me what do you understand? What are your concepts about inotropic state or myocardial contractility?
length will remain
The one girl has started. I think Anjum has started. Tell me, Anjum. Anjum. చెప్పమ్మా. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, sir.
So Anjum, can you tell me what is myocardial contractility?
Length decrease force contraction.
Jansi?
The force of contraction is increased or decreased by the action of calcium and catecholamines
ఇంకొద్దిగా different గా చెప్పు.
without changing the length of the muscle fiber.
Yeah, very good. The length of the muscle fiber is constant, but the force of contraction is increasing or decreasing. And like Jansi has told, this magic is happening because the intracellular calcium concentration is increasing or decreasing. Okay, so I told you in the initial discussion, the force of contraction in the myocardial fiber as compared to skeletal muscle fiber. In skeletal muscle fiber, if you want to increase the force of contraction, you can increase the number of fibers which are getting activated. So you want less force, less skeletal muscle fibers are contracting. You want more and more force, more and more skeletal muscle fibers are going to get activated, and the force of contraction will add up and increase. This is not possible in the heart. Why it is not possible in the heart, Bhavana?
Sir, because heart is a functional and mechanical sensation.
Very good. Because the heart is a functional and mechanical sensation. At any given point of time, all the cardiac muscle fibers will be contracted. So there is no way for us to say few will contract, then more, like in skeletal muscle fiber to increase the force of contraction. Then how to do this magic of keeping the length constant and increasing or decreasing the force of contraction by increasing the intracellular calcium. And there are some other factors. Okay, so all factors which will increase the intracellular calcium will increase the force of contraction. All factors which will decrease the intracellular calcium will decrease the force of contraction. So here we have graphs for different ventricular end diastolic volume. The stroke volume goes on increasing. The length is kept constant. This is called as the family of this happening. So this is called as the family of Frank-Starling's curve or graphs. Okay, so you can see here. Now I'll draw one line here. Don't be in a hurry to draw this. I know you're all very when I'm discussing, you'll be writing. When I want you to write, you'll be listening. Huh? So anyway, so you can see here sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous influences. Sympathetic is going to cause increase in the contractile state. Parasympathetic is going to cause a decrease. Maybe the line I drew was wrong. Okay, I should have drawn it. So sympathetic discharge, if it increases, force of contraction is going to increase. If the circulating catecholamine concentration, catecholamines means Roshni. What do you understand by the word catecholamines?
Noradrenaline, adrenaline.
Noradrenaline, adrenaline, ఇంకోటి ఉందమ్మా. Starts with D.
Sir,
Starts with D. D for Delhi.
dopamine.
Yeah, dopamine. Okay, so epinephrine, norepinephrine, and dopamine are called as catecholamines. And there is something called as force frequency relationship. Chandana, can you tell me what is force frequency relationship?
Sir,
Chandana, can you tell me what is force frequency relationship?
Force frequency.
Reshma, Raju.
So the force of contraction will increase with the frequency of activation.
Yeah, if the heart rate increases, the force of contraction increases. And Reshma, what is the cause for this, Reshma?
In activation of sympathetic system.
No. Some effect. Some effect. Starts with B. Starts with B. Anybody can tell me what is the cause for that effect? Where the heart rate
Bowditch phenomenon.
it is called as Bowditch phenomenon. But what is the
Beneficial
reason?
effect, sir.
Yeah, it is because of beneficial effect.
beneficial effect.
Okay, it is because of beneficial effect. Yeah. So then digitalis and other inotropic agents are also going to cause an increase in the force of contraction. So here I would like to add when he says other inotropic agents. See, now you can take down the graph and give some gap. Okay, give some gap here in the line I have drawn. Give some space so that you can add some more points. Okay, now you take down this. Frank-Starling's family of curves, CURVES. ఇది ఎవరండి 85 Moksha. It's the same girl who joined our college. ఏమ్మా నువ్వేనా మోక్ష? You can write homometric regulation of cardiac output and write this as Frank-Starling's family of curves, CURVES. Please give a gap here in this line I have drawn. And here you can write increased contractility. Here is decreased contractility. What is the other word you can use for increased and decreased contractility?
Positive dromotropic.
Yeah, positive dromotropic. Positive inotropic effect. And here you will write it as negative inotropic. Sometimes I myself will be wondering what I have written. You all don't worry. Please raise your hands once you finish. If 20 participants raise their hand, I'll continue. Please, quickly. Okay. Now I'll just quickly explain this to you. Okay, some explanation has to be done. So sympathetic discharge causes an increase in cardiac output. So you all know how sympathetic discharge is going to cause. Okay, I have explained this again and again and again whenever we spoke about increased sympathetic discharge in pacemaker potential, heart rate, everywhere I have told you. So you can just write it. So increased sympathetic discharge. What happens? There is release of, what is a neurotransmitter?
Norepinephrine.
Norepinephrine binds to
Beta 1 adrenergic receptors.
beta 1 adrenergic receptors. Then what will happen next?
Binds to CM.
Adenylyl cyclase activated. Increased activity. That will cause increased activation of cyclic AMP. Cyclic AMP will cause increased calcium release. Okay. Circulating catecholamines also have the same effect. Force frequency relationship, also called as Bowditch phenomenon. If the heart rate increases, the force of contraction increases up to 180 beats per minute. And this is because of an effect called as beneficial effect. And what is the cause for beneficial effect, Sri Kirti? What is the cause for the beneficial effect, Sri Kirti?
So increase in calcium and concentration will help in increasing force of contraction.
What are the other factors? Increased calcium, then?
Increase in catecholamines.
No. For beneficial effect. Increased calcium, then? Sharmila, what are the causes for beneficial effect? Increased calcium, then?
Angiotensin.
Dikshita?
Sir, increase in temperature and decrease in viscosity.
Yeah, increased calcium, increased temperature, and decrease in viscosity are the causes for beneficial effect. Okay, so then you can just write down that by the side or somewhere below in the notes. Digitalis. Digitalis will cause increased force of contraction. Anybody can tell me the mechanism of action of digitalis?
So digitalis, it inhibits the primary active transport of sodium potassium pump and which increases intracellular calcium.
Now you need to explain that to me, Bhavana. Digitalis inhibits.
The primary sodium potassium ATPase pump.
So there is no need to say primary. You just say sodium potassium pump or
ATPase
sodium
pump.
potassium ATPase. Okay, good. So what happens next? If
So
the
because of
sodium
that,
potassium, if the sodium potassium pump is inhibited, why should the force of contraction increase?
so because intracellular sodium levels rise,
Okay.
and since
Okay,
this pump,
Please go stepwise. So if sodium potassium ATPase is inhibited, there is an increase in intracellular sodium concentration.
so the gradient of exchange is lost.
Gradient of exchange for what?
So gradient of now the sodium will not be transported inside.
Yeah, Na plus Ca plus exchange
Anti-transport is blocked.
is inhibited. Because if intracellular sodium is more, then usually what happens is sodium will leak in. If intracellular sodium is low, if sodium potassium pump is active, sodium potassium pump will pump out sodium, isn't it? It will pump out free sodium, and then what it will do?
So it will throw out free sodium inside and throw out calcium outside.
No, sodium potassium pump.
So
Potassium,
three
two
inside
potassium
and two
ions.
potassium outside.
Yeah, sodium potassium
Potassium.
pump is going to pump out 3 sodium ions and pumping 2 potassium. So if by pumping out 3 sodium ions, sodium potassium pump will keep intracellular sodium low. If intracellular sodium is low, always sodium will try to come in.
Yes.
So that gradient is there and sodium will come in. When sodium tries to come in, calcium goes out.
Yes.
Yeah. So that is how calcium is kept low inside the cells. But if you block the sodium potassium ATPase, what is going to happen? Intracellular sodium will rise because it is not kicked out, sent out. So if intracellular sodium is more, then there is no gradient for sodium to come in. If sodium is not coming in, then calcium also we
Cannot go out.
cannot go. So ultimately, what is going to happen?
Intracellular calcium levels increase.
That you need to write. Okay, that you all need to write. Intracellular sodium concentration is increased. Then you write here gradient for operation of sodium calcium exchanger is decreased. Calcium is not sent out. Calcium concentration inside the cell calcium concentration inside the cell increases and force of contraction is going to increase. Okay. So if you have not understood all the steps, don't bother. You just remember sodium potassium pump is inhibited by digitalis. If sodium potassium pump is inhibited by digitalis, ultimately what happens? Intracellular calcium ion concentration is going to increase and the force of contraction is going to increase for the same length of the muscle fiber, and stroke volume is going to increase. Okay. Okay. Right. Then we have, did you understand this, all of you? Or you want me to repeat it again?
Yes, sir.
Yes, for what?
Repeat it again.
Okay. So digitalis is going to inhibit sodium potassium ATPase. Okay, so if sodium potassium ATPase is inhibited, sodium is not going to be pumped out. So the intracellular sodium concentration is going to increase. Okay. So if the intracellular sodium concentration is going to increase, the gradient for the operation of sodium calcium exchanger is decreased. Means the sodium calcium exchanger is a secondary active transport antiporter. Because sodium is low inside the cell, which is because of the sodium potassium ATPase functioning, intracellular sodium low, sodium tries to come in. There is one protein there. Okay, via one protein, sodium will try to come in. When sodium tries to come in, calcium is sent out. This is secondary active transport. Two substances are exchanged. So it is also called as an antiporter. So calcium is pumped out and calcium inside the cell is going to decrease. But now there is no sodium gradient because intracellular sodium has increased because of the inhibition of the sodium potassium ATPase, isn't it? So intracellular sodium increases. So now only if the gradient is there, that sodium calcium exchanger is going to function. So that sodium calcium exchanger is not going to function, and the calcium inside the cell is not kicked out or sent out. Ultimately, what is going to happen? Ultimately, what is going to happen?
The
Intracellular
intracellular
calcium is also going to increase. Sodium is increasing, calcium is also increasing. And both these effects are brought about by inhibition of the sodium potassium ATPase. Okay. Then you just sit and read for some time, just go through this, you'll understand. Then I have written here other inotropic agents. Other inotropic agents, you have drugs like xanthine derivatives. Xanthine derivatives. Xanthine derivatives are caffeine. Caffeine is present in
coffee.
coffee. And there is one more drug called as theophylline and its derivatives. Both theophylline is used in the treatment of bronchial asthma. So it's a bronchodilator. Okay. So when I was telling you about the beta adrenergic receptor action, finally what did it do? Which second messenger did it increase? Sympathetic discharge. Remember, I put one flow chart, beta one, and finally what was the second?
Cyclic AMP.
Cyclic AMP was increased, is it not? After cyclic AMP finishes its function, how is it removed? Anybody? After cyclic AMP is done with its function inside the cell, how is it removed from the cell? Any
So
idea?
maybe it's converted into ATP, sir.
No. No. Cyclic AMP is cyclic 3' 5' AMP. It is converted into cyclic 5' AMP, and something is going to happen to it. How? Very important. This point is very, very important. There is an enzyme which will break down cyclic AMP.
Adenylyl cyclase.
Adenyl cyclase is going to cause production of cyclic AMP. No, come on. Use your brain.
Protein kinase.
Yeah. No. No, you're all totally confused. See, when norepinephrine binds with beta-1 adrenergic receptors, adenylyl cyclase is activated. Adenylyl cyclase will act on ATP and convert it into cyclic AMP. Cyclic AMP will activate protein kinase. My question is, if this whole thing has to be stopped, cyclic AMP has to be destroyed. Somebody told the answer. I think Sri Kirti told the answer. Starts with P.
Phosphodiesterase.
Yeah, there is one enzyme called as phosphodiesterase. this enzyme will break down cyclic AMP. And that whole thing, action of this norepinephrine on the heart is going to be stopped. So these xanthine and caffeine derivatives which are there, they are going to block phosphodiesterase. So what will happen if phosphodiesterase is inhibited? What will be the consequence? Simple question I'm asking.
More
Take it even.
CNP.
Cyclic AMP will concentration will continue to be high inside the cell. Okay, so you must have also experienced this. If you drink, how many of you drink coffee? Another of my favorite topic. Coffee ఎంతమంది తాగుతారండి? ఏదైనా టాప్ సీక్రెట్ క్వశ్చన్ అడిగానా? Oh, not bad. Quite a few coffee lovers. After drinking coffee, sometimes have you experienced increase in heart rate, palpitations? No. Yes or no?
Yes, sir.
Sometimes this happens. Okay, so that is because coffee, which contains caffeine is going to go and inhibit that phosphodiesterase, and the action of cyclic AMP inside the myocardial fibers is going to be prolonged. Okay, so finally, anyhow, if you have not understood all this, just remember that when you say inotropic agents here, they will ask you, example, caffeine, theophylline are inotropic agents. If you say they also act by increasing calcium, we will be happy. If you say they act by inhibiting phosphodiesterase, which prevents breakdown of cyclic AMP, full distinction, 80-85 marks each of them. Okay, so bottom line in all this, here this line I'm drawing, all these things ultimately, whatever may be the initial mechanism, ultimately they are going to go and end on one common point. What is that?
Positive inotropic effect.
అదే ఎలా చేస్తారమ్మా?
Increasing calcium concentration.
Ultimately they are going to go and cause increase in calcium concentration. The mechanism may be different. Ultimately their end point is to cause increased calcium concentration. Just like our Tollywood movies, whatever happens inside the movie, in the end what is going to happen? మన సినిమాలో లాస్ట్ లో ఏమవుతుందండి? Hero, heroine will meet and everybody will live happily ever after. Isn't it? So olden days movies, hero and heroine will meet and everybody lived happily ever after. If there were two heroines, one heroine used to die. The director made sure she got some end stage disease like leukemia or some disease and she died. Nowadays movies, what is happening? Hero and one or two or three heroines, all will meet and all will live happily ever after. How that magic is going on, we are still trying to analyze. Anyway, so here also, whatever happens, whether it is sympathetic discharge, increased sympathetic discharge, increased circulating catecholamines, force frequency relationship, beneficial effect, digitalis inhibiting sodium potassium ATPase, inotropic agents like theophylline and caffeine inhibiting phosphodiesterase enzyme, whatever may be the mechanism. End point, what is the ion which is increasing inside the myocardial fiber? Tell me how each one is increasing. Inka super 100 ki 80 90 chastam. If you tell, all ultimately are going to cause increased calcium, will be very. Coming to the other side of that circle, hypoxia. Oh no, I think I need to get my. I'm not able to make out this arrow in the white background. Anyway, so hypoxia, hypercapnia, and acidosis will decrease myocardial contractility. So we need to clarify some things. What is hypoxia? Sri, who is this 147 will tell me. Sri entendidi. Who is roll number 147? Name and parent. Hello, good morning. Roll number 147.
Yes, sir.
పేరేంటమ్మా?
Sriharika, sir.
శ్రీహారిక. శ్రీహా కనిపిస్తోంది నాకు. ఓకే. శ్రీహారిక, హైపాక్సియా అంటే ఏంటమ్మా?
Decrease in the oxygen levels due to the high altitude levels.
కావ్య?
Lack of oxygen at tissue level.
Hypoxia means decreased partial pressure of oxygen in the tissues, whatever may be the cause. Okay, in the tissues, that is called as hypoxia. Kavya, 58, Kavya. Hypercapnia ante entama Kavya?
Increase in the CO2 concentration in the lungs.
In the lungs, body na?
In the body.
Increased partial pressure of carbon dioxide. Kavya ante endama meaning?
Sir, numerology prakaram parents ala pettaru.
But it is Kavya only.
Kavya.
Okay, so increased partial pressure of carbon dioxide is called as hypercapnia. What is acidosis? Kalyani, roll number 54.
Acidosis, increase in H plus ion concentration.
Very good. Increase in H plus ion concentration. All this will cause inhibition of the myocardium and decrease its contractility, and that is force of contact. Pharmacological depressants, many are there. Many drugs are there which can cause an inhibition of the myocardium contractility. So I'll just tell you a few. You have drugs, one drug called as quinidine. Quinidine can cause an inhibition of the myocardial contract. Procainamide. Procainamide. And barbiturates. Have you heard of barbiturates? They are addictive drugs.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, addictive drugs. People get addicted to this barbiturates. See, one thing I would like to tell you all. See, our human body, you would all realize by now, is one of the most amazing thing. All living things are amazing. How we are living, we don't know. In spite of so much advances, you can't tell the difference between life and death. Person is alive, he's dead. What is the difference? What is it there inside him? You will tell, okay, heart stopped, brain stopped, all that stopped, this is the reason. But actual difference between life and death, just a split second, we don't know. Okay, so this body, amazing, but I see, I don't know, maybe it's fashionable. We should not do anything which will injure our body knowingly. Especially smoking, alcohol, these drugs. Fancy, it's fanciful for some people, and putting tattoos, which we can't remove. Moment lo tattoo leskuntam gani, then it's like you're defacing yourself. You're injuring your own body. And this system, just like any system in this world, whether it is living or non-living, if you use car ante service cheyala, bike ante service cheyala, ill ante clean cheyala, mana body kuda maintain cheyala. You have to eat healthy food, you have to do regular exercise, you have to have good thoughts and meditation. Whatever technology will come, okay, this is not going to change. The person has to sleep for 8 hours and have 3 square meals of good healthy food. You do any variation in this, it is going to cause problems. If you look at the history of people who are dying because of COVID, recovery is very fast nowadays. Nobody is telling you that. In the second wave of the pandemic, death rate is more, no doubt. But people who are infected, also the healthy people, so-called previously healthy people, they're recovering very fast compared to the first wave. 2-3 days, they are back to normal. I have seen it among our students also. 1 or 2 days, they had cough, cold, they are back to normal. And if you look at the people who are recovering, they are the ones who do regular exercise, some form of exercise, don't have any comorbidities, no smoking, alcohol, even in the age group of above 50, 60. Those who are vaccinated with both doses, recovering fast. Death rate is 0 in them. All those who are expired, you go back and see, they have taken 1 dose of the vaccine, or they have not taken the vaccine at all. They are obese. They are having comorbidities like bronchial asthma or diabetes or hypertension. They are the ones who are unfortunately having severe form of the disease or they are expiring. Okay, so death is seen in these people, right? So you should do some regular exercise and not going for these things. Never go in for these addictive things. Nowadays, our movies will show it very fashionable to smoke and drink. Maybe at some point of time, at one age, it was fanciful for us also. We may have done it, but very quickly you realize it is of no use. Anyway, so moving on. So pharmacological depressants means they are drugs which we give to treat certain conditions. But unfortunately, one of the side effects these drugs are having is they are causing a depression of the myocardium. So few have given, many more maybe there. Quinidine, procainamide, and barbiturates. Loss of myocardium. Can anybody tell me when myocardium is lost? Quickly, you should tell me. Simple, common. Ischemia కాదు ఇంకోటి ఇంకోటి దీక్షిత ischemia loss అవ్వదు infarction FARCTION. So myocardial infarction, there is loss of myocardium. And there is something called as intrinsic depression. Okay, some people have suffered from some cardiac disease, say ischemia or infarction, and after they recover, their heart, even the remaining myocardium, whatever is there, it is not functioning properly compared to a normal person. As if something is there intrinsically within the heart, something has changed. It is depressing it or preventing it from functioning. Okay, so that is what we call as intrinsic depression of the myocardium. This we see in our Indian population. Whatever you do, they will be unhappy. There are some students or people, you must have come across these people. Whatever they have, you do, they will find fault. They will find fault. We are having a disease which can be controlled very easily. You wear a mask, maintain social distancing, and wash your hands regularly. How difficult is this? And get yourself vaccinated. That vaccinated also, that is okay. If you do this, wear a mask, wash your hands, and maintain social, you will not get the disease. We are where we are today. Anyway, and people will be depressed. All if you switch on the news, better you don't watch the news and WhatsApp university. Yeah. Anyway, so this is about the myocardial contractility. So you have some factors which will increase the myocardial contractility. We call it as positive inotropic effect. You have some factors which will decrease the myocardial contractility. We call it as negative inotropic effect. So bottom line is, all factors which cause positive inotropic effect, whatever may be the mechanism, ultimately what is the end point, ma?
Increase in calcium.
Increase in specific increase in calcium.
Increase in intracellular calcium.
Intracellular myocardial calcium concentration. And the other factors like hypoxia, hypercapnia, acidosis, pharmacological depressants, loss of myocardium, intrinsic depression, all that will cause a decrease in the inotropy. Can you give me, can I continue for another 20 minutes?
Yes, sir.
At least I need to see hands raising, at least 20-25 hands. If they are raised, I'll continue. Otherwise, I'll stop. Okay. So just to put things in perspective with regards to cardiac output, what is it that we have discussed till now? So what is it that we discussed till now in cardiac output? So we saw the definitions of cardiac output. We saw some variations that will happen in cardiac output. And then we looked about major part of our discussion was regulation of cardiac output. So in regulation of cardiac output, we spoke about extrinsic autoregulation, intrinsic autoregulation. Extrinsic autoregulation, we started with one formula. Jayashri, what is that formula which we started with? In regulation of cardiac output, Jayashri, roll number 52, what is it that we started with? What is that formula?
Stroke volume is directly proportional to end diastolic volume.
Kadama, simple formula. Cardiac output is equal to simple formula. Cardiac output is equal to heart rate into
Stroke volume.
heart rate into stroke volume. Rashmita.
Sir,
Changing heart rate changes cardiac output. What is that regulation called as, Rashmita?
extrinsic auto-regulation, sir.
Very good. And what is the other one called as, Rashmita? Changing stroke volume, changing the cardiac output.
Intrinsic auto-regulation.
What are the two subtypes in intrinsic auto-regulation? Vinutna, roll number 171.
Sir, homometric and heterometric.
పూర్తిగా చెప్పు, నువ్వు ప్రొఫెసర్ మాదిరి నిద్రలో చెప్తున్నావు. Homometric regulation and heterometric regulation. Heterometric regulation is which law, Vinutna? Heterometric regulation is nothing but operation of
Frank-Starling law, sir.
Okay. Bhargavi, roll number 7. What is homometric regulation, otherwise also called as what state it is? Starts with I, that word. Bhargavi is awake.
Awake.
Congratulations.
Yes,
Cheppu
sir.
Bhargavi, తొందరగా.
Isometry.
INO. ఇప్పుడే రాశాను కదరా. సరే, రెడ్డి గారు మీరు చెప్పండి. 123.
So inotropic.
Yeah, it is called as inotropic state. Okay. So in the previous class, I don't know, I don't remember when I had told you this thing. What is this preparation called as?
Heart lung
It
preparation.
is called as heart lung preparation, where you have a setup where you can change the peripheral resistance or afterload, and you can also change the preload or end diastolic volume. Okay. So then finally they have concluded that this is the one I wanted to show. So you can start here to understand this web. It is almost like a web, intrinsic web, where most of the things are interconnected to each other. If you understand this point, that in the cardiovascular system, all the points are ultimately interrelated to each other, your life will be very easy. Where it is linking, that is the key. That depends on how much effort you are going to put. So cardiac output is equal to heart rate into stroke volume. Cardiac output itself is going to determine the systolic blood pressure. Systolic blood pressure is going to determine two things. It is going to determine the afterload. It is also going to determine the left ventricular size. Okay. Left ventricular size, we already know it is going to determine the stroke volume. What is this relationship called as between left ventricular size and stroke volume? Which law?
Frank-Starling's.
Here it is the Frank-Starling's law. Okay. And coming to this part, okay, the speed of the myocardial fiber shortening is going to determine the stroke volume. We already know that. And the myocardial fiber shortening is going to determine by afterload. More afterload, it is less. So that is why you have a dashed line here. Myocardial contractility, yes, we discussed that. And preload is also going to determine the myocardial fiber length shortening. Right? So quickly take down this diagram. You should start here. You should start here. This should be your starting point. And then you connect all the things slowly.
Excuse me, sir.
Shall I move on?
Excuse me, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Right. So, cardiac output, we looked at definitions, we looked at variations, we looked at the regulation of cardiac output. What is remaining? Any idea what is remaining in cardiac output? Anyway, this is applied aspects. This shows the systolic dysfunction and the diastolic dysfunction curve. Okay, so this line, it is shifting towards the right of this line. This is the systolic dysfunction, and to this line, it is shifting to the left. This is the diastolic dysfunction. Right? Pressure volume loop, what I had told. Anyway, I don't want to go into that now. So these are some slides, shows in a nutshell what we have discussed till now. So cardiac output is equal to stroke volume into heart rate. Stroke volume is determined by end-diastolic ventricular volume, plasma norepinephrine, activity of sympathetic nerves, which determines both, and parasympathetic is going to decrease. There is one more much better graph. It tells in a nutshell all the factors. Yeah, better. You can take down this diagram. Anything you would like to add here? Anything you would like to add here? Are you able to hear me?
Yes,
Yes.
sir.
Yes, sir.
You can add the cardiac pump here. And this inspiratory movement is which pump?
Thoracic or
Respiratory.
respiratory
Thoracic.
pump.
Thoracic
Thoracic.
or respiratory.
Respiratory pump.
And our class on the. Okay. No, I'm ending the class here, and I didn't know you had an anatomy class. Okay. I'm sorry for that.
Thank you, sir.
And yes,
Thank you, sir.
Thank you,
please
sir.
read up about measurement of cardiac output for tomorrow's class. Okay.